Now, with the release of Zombieland this weekend, we thought we would look at sort of the horror comedy genre, or the comedy horror genre, whichever way you kind of want to look at it. And joining me in studio is Ross McDonough from rossvross.com. Ross, it's at that point where we've got to plug the site. Hit me with what Ross v Ross is all about for those that haven't heard of it yet.
Well, Gordon, rossvross.com is the movie battleground where me and a fellow journalist, we take two related films and we have at each other about which one is better than the other.
Good stuff. So check it out, guys. rossvross.com. Now, before we get into the whole horror comedy hybrid, let's just take a clip from one of my favourite comedy horrors. It's, of course, Shaun of the Dead, starring Nick Frost and Simon Pegg. Here's one of those classic scenes from that movie.
I get higher, baby. I get higher, baby. I get higher, girl.
A clip there from Shaun of the Dead. I have to say, I absolutely love that movie. But Ross McDonough, I can't believe this. You haven't seen Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, I'm going to have to make a shocking admission there, Gordon, and concede that I haven't, in fact, seen Shaun of the Dead. Even though a lot of people have recommended it to me, and I know it is it's almost considered a classic of the genre now. It's the genre that doesn't really interest me. I know you were discussing this during the week and we were having a look at a list of films, and I haven't actually seen a lot of them just because I think I've gone off the genre completely.
What do you think is wrong with, say, comedy horrors?
Well, for me, I think as a term, it's a bit of a cop-out term for filmmakers. I think a lot of them went in with the intention of making a horror, realised halfway through that it wasn't actually that scary, and then they just said, oh yeah, they stuck it in the comedy horror genre. I mean, I like my horrors, I like them to, you're watching them, you got to be holding your breath, you got to need to change your pants afterwards, the Blair Witch kind of horror. And if it's a comedy, I want to be laughing out loud in the vein of Aeroplane or something like that. I just think the mix masher genre doesn't really work for me.
Okay, that's an interesting point though. Yeah, I can understand where you're coming from there, Ross, because yeah, it could be deemed that it is sort of a cop-out. You know, necessarily if we can't get the really good scare, well, we might be able to work off the sort of the cheap kind of gag.
Exactly.
There's one particular film which I suppose when it first came out, it kind of got people talking, was An American Werewolf in London, because when John Landis released that in 81, people just didn't know how to exactly kind of categorise it, because it was an out-and-out horror movie, but it had these comedic elements within the film, and people just didn't know, what are we dealing with here? This was sort of the first of its kind.
Well, I don't know whether it's something just personally in my head, but I just like to categorize, when I'm sitting down to a film, I like to categorize it. Is this a horror? Am I watching this like a horror, or am I watching this like a comedy? And American Werewolf was a perfect example. I watched that and I wanted to take it as a horror, and it was it was quite horrific, for want of a better word. And just when the comedy elements creeped in, I just it just kind of put me off it a little bit.
Would you see that as a horror comedy? I'm going to say a horror comedy because essentially it is a horror film with comedic elements, but say Shaun of the Dead is a comedy horror because that's an out-and-out comedy, but it's got the setting of sort of the horror sort of scenario.
Horror comedies is the one I'm not too fond of because, as I say, they're a bit of a cop-out. Comedy horrors I do quite like. I mean, that's a comedy film with horror elements, with the likes of the Scary Movie series, which I know it's a real guilty pleasure for me now, but I have to say I do get a laugh out of Scary Movie series.
I always kind of find those kind of like fast food comedies because, you know, like they're just very much of the time. They're much of the pop culture references. So you might look at, say, Scary Movie 3, I don't know, maybe in 10 years' time, and you might be hard pressed at some, but what the hell were they doing at the time? Like, you know, laughing at particular, say, maybe Z-list celebrities.
Yes.
And bits and pieces like that. There's the particular kind of, say, horror comedies, which I love, is Return of the Living Dead, which is a real gem of a movie. Dan Bannon is behind that, and he wrote Alien. Yeah. And he's now a lecturer, I think, in Harvard, in their sort of their film studies. This is a great one. If you haven't seen this film, it's an absolute gem. And Dog Soldiers, Neil Marshall's first film. Did you actually see that at all?
I've seen Dog Soldiers, and I quite enjoyed it. Again, in the cinema, taking it on as a horror was you know, it was trucking along quite nicely. And then as the film went on, again, I couldn't decide whether it was a horror or comedy. And then, of course, the last reveal at the very end with the headline, you know, it's only a subheading in the paper, and the main headline in the newspaper is England beating Germany 5-1, which was like, oh my God, this is supposed to be a comedy. And I thought it was a horror. I was really in for a horror. But it was funny you should mention, like, the way that the zeitgeist changes and pop culture and films don't stand up later on. I find that with a lot of these horror comedies, I think people, they think they like them because when they watched them when they were much younger, and they treated them as horrors when they were younger, and they were really scared by them. The likes of your Child's Play and your Nightmare on Elm Street, they're viewed as horror comedies now. You know, people will laugh along, but the thing you're laughing at is because you're laughing at the fact that you found these things scary as a child. It's almost nostalgic. You're laughing at the fact that you were terrified by these things. You used to view them as horrors. Now you view them as horror comedies, and that's just where I tail off interest-wise.
Another very interesting point there, Ross. Peter Jackson will take his early catalogue of films. You wouldn't kind of put them with the director of Lord of the Rings, because he started out and it was splatter films really that he was making. Bad Taste was the first film, which is followed up. Then I know there was Meet the Feebles, and then there was Brain Dead. But Bad Taste, like, that's very much a comedy horror movie.
Yeah, now that Bad Taste is, and Brain Dead, two films I really, really enjoyed. They're almost in a category of their own. I mean, Peter Jackson's early films, if you haven't seen them, you should really, really get them. Especially Brain Dead. It is brilliant. It's complete piss take. Like, it's just gore and more gore, and it's hilarious in context. Like, he's not trying to scare anybody. There's no jokes as such. As it's not a comedy. It's just splatter, and I think that stands out on its own.
A lot of directors who have now become, say, big A-list directors, and they start out in the horror genre because it's one of those particular genres that you don't need a big movie star. It can look gritty, it can look dirty, the film, and hopefully it'll find its audience. The director in question that I'm thinking of is Sam Raimi, who made Evil Dead, and Evil Dead 2 is one of those films that some feel it eclipsed the first film, but again, it's got it's hard to kind of pin it down. Is it a horror comedy or is it a comedy horror? Because even though it's horrific at times, it is very funny throughout the whole movie.
I'm gonna make another shocking admission to you.
Oh, no way!
I haven't seen any of Bruce Campbell's, I have to say.
I'm gonna give you a lend of the box set. Next time you're in, I'm going to bring the box set in so you can watch them.
That's fair enough.
I think you're going to have to watch them, especially coming up to Halloween. You're going to absolutely love those. But which ones do you like, Ross? Which ones have you seen that you've enjoyed?
Well, I like, again, the ones that are very obviously comedies first and the horror element thrown in. The likes of Ghostbusters, Gremlins, 1 and 2, and of course one of my all-time favourite movies, Beetlejuice. I mean, it's just, the film is hilarious, but, you know, it's just on a horror theme. And as I said, Scary Movie, even though it is pop culture, I do get a laugh out of it. Scary Movie loses a bit of points for me, obviously, because it spawned the likes of your epic movies and your dance flicks and other such screen vomit. But I mean, for me, it will always hold a special place for me.
Well, Ross, it's been great having you back in studio. We look forward to you back again. And what do you think we'll be talking about next time now, Ross? What will be our next feature?
I don't know. One I really want to approach is cartoons and which ones should be made into movies. That's it. It's something that's really I've been thinking about a long time.
Well, you know what? Let's get our listeners in on this. If you would like to kind of throw a particular nostalgic cartoon that you think should be adapted for the big screen, you can text us now. Meteor 085 711 1038. One which I'd love to see is Mask.
We were just having a discussion, myself and Ross off Ross v Ross. Who would you cast as Matt Tracker? We couldn't come up with a name. Matt Damon was the only one we could think of.
God, yeah, that would be. You're thinking blonde, you know what I mean? It's hard to find. Brad Pitt.
Daniel Craig, yeah.
Oh, Daniel Craig might work. How would they make that though? That would be. You'd be talking nearly a $200 million movie.
It's a real challenge. And then of course you're going to face legal suits from Lucasfilm, but since T-Bob was pretty much R2D2 in moped form.
That's a very good point. But they'll probably get some asshole like Stephen Sommers to direct it. That G.I. Joe hack.
Yeah, or Michael Bay, who we've lost respect
for. We'll say no more. Ross, look forward to having you back in to talk about that. Until then, we'll talk to you very soon.
Cheers, Gordon.